I am Pixel Dan. Thank you for joining me for another interview. Welcoming back to the channel today, it's Brian Flynn from Super7. How's it going, Brian?
Good. How are you doing, Dan?
Doing great, man. Doing great. We got some new stuff we got to talk about. Some stuff that I know we touched on a little bit in the past, but now it's out there. The pre-orders have begun, and a lot of people have questions about SilverHawks. So we're going to talk SilverHawks.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'm going to jump right into it. I got a lot of questions. I'm sure you're ready to, I'm sure you're answering a lot of these same questions already, but
ready to go.
We're going to fire more. Okay. Awesome. Well, this is the one I want to start with. What can you tell me about SilverHawks LLC?
What can I tell you about SilverHawks LLC?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about, like, does this mean like Super7 like outright owns the SilverHawks? Like, what's the deal with this?
SilverHawks LLC owns the SilverHawks.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
You know, Super7 is a company that is licensing the SilverHawks from SilverHawks LLC.
Okay. All right. All right. Because I've seen a lot of talk that like maybe Super7, this isn't like a normal license that you have with the other stuff, that this might be like you have a little more control over this.
We might have a little bit more control over this.
Is that all I'm going to get out of you?
Yeah. I mean, you know, there's a couple things that are probably coming out announcement wise, but I mean, it's set up to, you know, we have worked on it for a long time. It is not owned by Super7. Okay. It is a separate IP. It is owned by its own company that is in charge of doing what's right for SilverHawks, not necessarily what's right for Super7.
Okay, got it. Got it. So you are just licensing it out. But I know you guys launched with like other types of product besides action figures. You did like some t-shirts and stuff like that. So it sounds like there might be more of that kind of stuff on the way. I know you guys do that a lot. You do t-shirts and lots of different types of merchandise.
This is, you know, obviously, as you know, I'm by, I guess, answering the question is, wait, there seems to be some overlap here. You know, yes, there's some overlap theoretically, but Super7 is just coming to SilverHawks LLC and is licensing it, you know, on a variety of categories, no different than we license any other, you know, ThunderCats, for example. And so, you know, we're trying to be part of the rebirth of SilverHawks.
Okay, very cool. And of course, with that, you're doing a line of action figures, which is the Ultimates
line of Ultimates.
Line of Ultimates. So that was what we first saw as far as action figures go. You revealed the Ultimates figures. The pre-orders have begun. And I know that there's been already a lot of questions about why you guys chose the looks that you did and everything like that. So maybe let's just start there. What can you tell us about your decision to base these off of the animation rather than the vintage Kenner action figures?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is going to go into like a multi-phase question at this point. It's going to unfold like a flower.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thing. I mean, if we talk about it sort of openly, most people's affection and nostalgia for the SilverHawks is less rooted in the animation than it is in the toys. The animation was up for 2 seasons. It's very hard to get unless you want to pay for it nowadays. It's not, you know, you can't just go log on to YouTube and watch SilverHawks or anything else like that. Most people's inherent gut nostalgia reaction to SilverHawks is based off the toys, because the toys are far more prevalent than the anime or animation, excuse me, is. And so for most people, when you say SilverHawks, what comes into their head is the toy, not the cartoon. Where with other lines, it very well could be the cartoon first, then the toys, or a mix of the both. In as much, when we started coming at it, there's a host of reasons which we'll walk through. But you know, we're like, okay, first off, there's never been cartoon accurate SilverHawks ever, because the toys are not. The toys are amazing, but they're not really accurate to the show. I mean, Buzzsaw, for Christ's sake, is green. So they are their own beast. And we really wanted to come back, much like we're doing with ThunderCats, and say, okay, this is what this looked like on screen. this is what, if you hear the kids yelling, you know, this is the version of SilverHawks that you didn't get when you were a kid. And we want to be very faithful to what the cartoon was. So that's where we started, was really trying to give yourself something slightly different than what you've had before. And if you're collecting ThunderCats, here is the natural progression into SilverHawks, where they family together on the shelf as animation accurate figures. Then we can go into the next question that always follows that up, which is, where's the vac metal?
Yeah, exactly.
and or why aren't they painted metallic? And the first question is, they are painted a metallic, but we're trying to match on screen a bit more. So they're a bit more of a matted down metallic, a bit more pearlized. And so you don't see these big, crazy reflections. Because even in the show, like the intro had some big, crazy reflections. But when you're really watching the show, there's some lines and stuff that pass over, but it's not like they're blinging all the time. So we're like, so the first part I'd say, is there's a paint that I'm trying to do that I haven't talked, we didn't put it out there because I don't know if we can actually pull it off. What I'm trying to get is an automotive paint with a color shift in it. So like if you're looking at like cars that drive by that look like they're sort of purple and then they shift to red or anything else like that.
Yeah,
we're trying to have one that is a light bluish that winks over to silver, but that's still got sort of a pearlized matte over it, so that when you have skin tone pieces and those metallic pieces, they family together rather than being like, oh, it's this really shiny thing with this dead matte part that sits on it, where they wouldn't match up so well. But I don't know if I'm going to be able to get it to do that. So, right now where it stands is it's a pearlized metallic sheen. And if you go back and watch the show, most of the team is about a 40% gray with hints of blue. Like it's not a gray green or a gray red. It's very much a gray blue. And then Quicksilver is about more of like a 20% gray blue. And he's definitely got a little bit more blue in him than the other figures do. So a lot of people are like, oh, it's not quite right. It's pretty much on point for color tone. The difference is that you can't really get is how does that color look as you move it and the light reflects off of it. It's because if all of a sudden I put gradients or anything else on the renders, I think that would be, that's a difficult sort of thing to describe. But that's where we're trying to go with the paints on them. And then if we go to the sort of, and maybe I'm overly prepped, but if we talk about vac metal, vac metal creates a host of issues of how and why you could or could not make it work on figures.
Yeah, this is definitely something I wanted to talk about. And I know we touched on this a little bit the last time when you first announced SilverHawks, we kind of talked about how they probably couldn't be vac metal. And I wanted to ask you kind of to go into specifics about that, because I know these are more highly articulated figures, which you do have to use like a softer plastic for the joints. Does that have something to do with why vac metal couldn't work on a figure like this?
Yes. So vac metal is a plating, is a coating, not dissimilar to like if you electroplate stuff in jewelry or anything else like that. So it lays on the outside. Typically, you can only vac metal ABS plastic. There are times that you can get away with using PVC, but it's few and far between. But ABS is inflexible; it's rigid, so you can do it and it won't crack. If the thing that makes all of these action figures work that everybody's buying and collecting right now is that the bodies are all the other parts are made out of PVC, and that's what has that give. So if you think about the male female ends of like as you pop in a hand or an arm or anything else like that, they've all got ridges and cavities that allow themselves to flex. And then secondarily, where the discs are, where they move, that friction fit, the only reason that works is because you've got two things that are essentially the same size, but they'll give a little bit as you move them. And that's what allows them to move on top of each other. Um, if you were to vac metal those parts, you run into multiple problems, which is one, it's a coating that goes on the outside. So all of your joinery pieces become bigger on the male side and smaller on the female side. So now they don't fit. And when you try to make them fit, you're going to start cracking the vac metal, because the vac metal doesn't give. And the moment the vac metal cracks and chips, it tends to spiderweb and start chipping down the line. So first off, the material can't really be vac metal, because if it gives, it'll start cracking. Then putting them together starts cracking. It just sort of becomes this domino effect. Like you could move to an all ABS, but then you wouldn't be able to do a lot of the swappable parts unless you did more of a standard friction fit that doesn't work so well. So the example that's easiest to use for most people is removable limbs C3PO. That figure is all ABS, and how those joints come together where they're just straight lines. And the first, couple days you have him, he's pretty tight, but then he gets real loose real fast because the tolerances don't allow anything else there. So same thing, like if you grab any of your old Star Wars figures, using that analogy, there's flexibility. You can bend the arms and legs a little bit, not a lot, but there's a little bit of give. C3PO, there is no give. And that's because they made them out of ABS instead of PVC.
Gotcha. Okay. And that's kind of what I was thinking with the joints and everything. Now you guys have used vac metal on some of your lesser articulated figures in the past, like like the Metropolis figures for Reaction and Hero for your 5.5-inch Masters of the Universe line. So is it possible we could see vac metal on maybe some Reaction SilverHawks, if that's something that might be coming?
That is much easier to do. Much easier to do. Same thing like Hero, that when you go and you tap that chest where it's been vac metal, it's like, it doesn't feel or sound like what you get on the arms. It's like ding, ding, ding. It's almost like hollow. It's very hard. It's almost a little bit more brittle. There's places. It's not like I didn't know people were going to be like, why isn't it vac metal? It's like, the well we have to go down to figure out vac metal is a little crazy. I mean, no different. I mean, you've got the Voltron back there. The Voltron's got vac metal on his sword. He's got vac metal on his shield. But same thing, like, how that shield has to be held, like it can only be this friction fit, but you've got enough in the hand to allow it to pop in there. But there's no give on that shield at all. No give at all.
Right. Yeah. This is the Toy Colors Voltron Ultimate that you guys did. And I actually did have him sitting back here, not necessarily for the vac metal on his sword and his shield, but like he's got a pretty great metallic paint deco on him. And when I was first seeing the renders for the Ultimate SilverHawks, I was almost wondering like what that final paint was going to look like. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about like you're looking into the car paint, the automotive type paint, because I didn't like those renders. I assume those are like computer renders, right? It didn't feel like they really showed off properly how shiny they may or may not have been. And so my immediate thought was this Voltron. I was like, if they look as shiny as this, I think I could get behind that, because this is pretty cool.
And this is where we get into the fine line of the fact that, like, we're running like 9 paint samples at a time trying to get to the right paint. If it's quite that bright, you start to run into, at least in my mind, contrast between how matte the hands should be. Like if I'm talking about Steelheart, and some of the other stuff, it's like, it's finding that balance between how much shine can we give it, but still make it feel like it families within the animation. So there's going to be metallics to it, but there's such a wide range. But yeah, the renders don't make it look blingy. And I think that's part of the knee-jerk reaction to, I remember SilverHawks and they bling.
And well, absolutely. And
it's because they did such a wonderful job at making those wonderful toys. Technically accurate, maybe less so, but rad toys.
Well, and it's a valid
Completely,
point,
completely.
that there's a difference between the toys and the animation, and you can say that about basically all of
Oh
those
yeah,
shows, right? Like He-Man was the same way, and ThunderCats, you already made that point. Like there is a difference between the toys and the colors used on the toys and the looks in the animation. But like you said earlier, I'm definitely one of those guys where when I think of Silverhawks, I think of those Kenner toys. And that's what made those toys so special, was the fact that they were so shiny. So I was right there along with everybody else, even though I knew not to expect vac metal because we had already had this discussion. But when I first saw them, my initial thought was, those are just not as shiny as I want them to
yeah,
be. So I
yeah,
totally get it.
and it's not an unreasonable reaction. I think the unreasonable reaction of like the world is over, that's a little bit of the unreasonable reaction, but yeah, it's not unreasonable to, we had the same thing of like, how do we deal with the mental expectation of Chrome versus the actuality of what the show is like. And if I'm building a line of figures for somebody to collect, and this is the person that's buying ThunderCats from me, and I'm doing animation accurate ThunderCats, and then rolling into Silverhawks, how do I make sure that these things can all sit on a shelf together and feel like they're part of the same family? And we've gone back and forth a lot, and like to the same point, like I'm telling you, it's like, and we're still working on paint samples. And it's funny because we're doing all the paint sampling on like random reaction figures. So it's like, here's a Motorhead figure, but painted up in weird blue and silver. How does this look? How does this look? What about this one? So, yeah, we're still working on it. And I'm hoping we can really get that wink so that there is that specialness to the paint where it isn't like, oh, it's just got a hit of paint. Like we're trying to make sure that there's really something cool going on in the effect.
Do you think you guys will share updates along the way, maybe showing some photos and
Yeah,
everything?
once we really nail into how the paint's going to look, I'm sure we'll be sending something out because we know that that's the single biggest issue for people with the Silverhawks is, please tell me how it's exactly painted. And it's like, well, I'm still working on developing the paint. And it's not like I can buy the paint off a shelf. Like we're going back to, not to the factory, but the paint manufacturer that's working with the factory and going, okay, how can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And they're sampling different kinds of paint so that we can try to get that paint to match this.
Gotcha. So is Silverhawks working like a lot of the other pre-orders that you guys have done for Ultimates, where the orders come in first and then the figures go into production based on the orders that you get?
Yeah, that's definitely the same model. I think the difference here is that, as over the last year, we have more and more increasing confidence that the pre-orders are going to meet the minimums that we need to get the toys made. So in a case of, Silverhawks, we actually were able to send the molds out for tooling before we launched the pre-orders. Now it was only a couple weeks, but it's still going to give us 6 more weeks ahead of schedule than we would have normally been.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's
So
cool.
the goal is to get to a point where by the time the pre-order happens, we've already sent something off to tooling. And so that we're that much closer to delivering once the pre-order gets done. But if we go back simply 18 months to 2 years ago with our product and with people's faith that we would deliver product, that, it was more touch and go of whether or not enough people were going to get behind the line and enough people were interested in what we were doing. I think that, especially once ThunderCats 2 and 3 land in people's hands, like, but with being able to deliver, masters the way we are, they've gotten a wave of ThunderCats. Some of the wrestlers have shown up. Turtles is coming on a regular basis. Like wave 3 is shipping like what, next week, I think, out of the
Oh,
warehouse.
okay. That's great.
And it's in the warehouse. So, as we deliver more and more, there seems to be more confidence in what we're making. And then, yes, you will be getting it at the back end. People are less worried that we're magically going to go out of business or something. And then it allows us to have more confidence to just get the process of manufacturing started earlier and earlier.
Cool. All right, before we move too far away from the colors, I wanted to ask you about the possibility of toy colored variants down the road. Now, I know you can't reveal anything like that you're not ready to reveal yet, but we've seen you do that sort of thing already.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there's been multiple versions of Toxie. There's been multiple versions of Baxter Stockman. Voltron that I just showed you, that's the toy colors variant. And not even necessarily with like getting a silver Quicksilver, but like, I really like the green Buzzsaw. I loved that figure as a kid. Like, is that stuff you guys are thinking about?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we've had conversations about all this stuff. I think the thing for me is when I look at variants, I try to make them feel like they are not, you don't have an incomplete collection if you don't have that. So I say that in a way of like, okay, if I'm building out an animation line, like right now, I'm going to start making this and we're going to go here. And if you are the person that also would want a green buzzsaw, there will be a time and a place, usually that's much more convention centric, where we will make that available because we know that there are people that want it. But it also isn't, if you don't have it, your collection's not complete. Does that make sense?
It does. Yes.
You know, so in that question of like, yes, are we thinking about like at some point we should make a green buzzsaw, assuming that the demand is there, which I think it will be, you know, yeah, of course we'll probably get to that point. I think in the beginning though, I would much rather get through a few more of the main characters from the series and a couple more wacky villains. And then if everybody's still excited, then okay, let's come back and like, what are those recolors and repaints that people are interested in? Let's find a time and a place to make that available. But it's not imperative that you do it. And somebody doesn't feel like I'm trying to milk them for another variant versus, hey, there's some people that just need or want one of each character that's part of the series and it's the same line. And then there are other people who are like, I want every color of this guy. You know, like, you know, for me, it's like, there's the same thing. If we made Baxter Stockman in 29 colors, it'd be like, okay, he's clear orange. And this would be like, yes, give me another one. You know, and there's a lot of other people who are like, I don't want that Baxter Stockman. I want the one that looks like Baxter. So
definitely,
that's always the fine line.
It's a fine line. Yeah, exactly.
It's a fine line between having a lot of fun and really going deep for the people that want to go deep, but also not making other people feel like you're compelling them to spend money on something that they don't want to spend money on.
Sure. That makes total sense. And you were just kind of so you were just kind of talking about the characters too, and like some of the things you're thinking about for the next waves.
Oh, we're well into the next wave. I was looking at sculpts yesterday.
Oh, really? Oh, that's really awesome to hear. So what were your kind of considerations for who should be in this first wave? I personally am really happy to see Steelheart there because she's such a hard figure to get from the vintage line. It's kind of cool to get her right out the gate. And obviously Quicksilver makes a lot of sense. Monstar is the big main villain. So is that just kind of what you were thinking? Let's get some of those big heavy hitters right away and then maybe into some of the more obscure stuff if these do well?
Obviously with Quicksilver and Monstar, like, those two are going to be in wave one. Like,
yeah, it's like He-Man and Skeletor. It's like,
of course they are. And for me, the female characters always get left out to the end. It's like, okay, we made everybody else. I guess we'll make the girl.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be like, no, we're going to have Steelheart in wave one. And then for villains, it was just the same thing. It was like, Buzzsaw's cool. It's a giant boxy robot. It's a huge toy still. It's a cool, big boxy robot. Like, he's rad. Let's get in there. I think, the biggest thing that we had on that was really, we wrestled a lot with the size of Monstar. As you want him to be big and towers over everybody, it gets expensive real quick, because you're going up in mass, physical size. So the volume of air, if you will, that he takes up is so much bigger than a regular figure. It's like 3 to 4x. And it was like, we already know, look, $55 is a lot for a toy already. And as you go up, it's like, where is the threshold between that's cool and this is just too expensive? And as we kept going back and forth and we would bring him back down and make him a little bit shorter, he kind of didn't feel right. And as we talked to a few people about it, ultimately what they came back with was like, look, in the end, we need to do it all the way, because it's either right or it's always like, God, why is he only an inch taller? Like, he's not supposed to be an inch taller. He needs to be, 3.5, 4 inches taller. He needs to be huge. And that was my biggest worry, even beyond, the fact that they weren't going to be vac metal, was what was the reaction going to be to, like, yeah, it's rad that he's 11 inches tall, but it's $85 and I'm out. But in the end, it was just like making it the correct size and scale won out versus bringing it down and making it not quite what it needs to be to feel right. But it was definitely a little bit nervous for me.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, because I feel like those are the two main sticking points I'm seeing from everybody talking about these. If it's not the vac metal, it's the price point that they're talking about. And I think it's definitely true that with every one of these new lines you introduce, you are getting new eyes on people that may not have ever paid any attention to the other stuff might have been like, oh, SilverHawks, and then their reaction is, why are they so expensive?
Yeah.
And I know you've always been very open in these interviews at what goes into these and why the costs are the way they are, but $85 is a lot of money for a big tall figure.
$85 is a preposterous amount of money.
It's expensive, so I totally get the sticker shock on that.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. It's like, could we have made him $65? Sure, but then maybe he was only an inch and a half taller than Quicksilver or something. And it's more about the volume of mass that's in that figure, because it's not just like, oh, he got taller. It's like everything got bigger. Like, he's huge.
I'm excited to see like you actually holding it. Like, I want to see the physical thing.
So much bigger than Mumra.
Oh,
it's
man,
crazy. And if I was at the office, I could hold up some resin outputs, but even the resin output, the last one that we looked at, we're like, it's still not right. It's still it towers over him and it's an inch shorter than the final. And it's just like, it's big. But yeah, I mean, there's a host of issues that go into it. Simply speaking, China is very, very, very quickly moving into a more white collar and non-factory based economy very quickly. Prices at the factory are going up all the time. Materials have gone up exponentially, especially paper. Paper's up about 4x what it used to be just for packaging.
Jeez.
Anything that's based in vinyl, so PVC is polyvinyl chloride. Vinyl is what they were using to make, COVID hand gloves, and it's in a lot of the masks. And so vinyl, which is just part of PVC, but still an inherent ingredient in there, those prices went astronomical. And you have on top of that sort of rising factory costs, harder to get labor. Then you get into the global shipping pandemic, and everything about it is just driving things upwards. And the difference between what we're doing and say somebody like a NECA, which does great product, and Randy's wonderful, NECA's playing in a much more volume game. They're selling their stuff to Target, they're selling their stuff to Walmart. They're able to do certain things that we can't do in terms of what it is. And even then, I'll be quite honest, I'm not even sure how they get that stuff out there at some of the prices that they do. But I would rather make sure that the figure comes out right than try to save $5 or $10 and make it be like it's 80%, 85% of what it should be.
Cool. And I mean, if they're selling, I mean, I guess that'll tell how fans are comfortable with it, comfortable with stuff that size. I mean, maybe this is a bit of a test too.
Well, it's not my intention to make more $85 figures. That's for sure.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess that's not necessarily what I meant, but
yeah, I mean, the price move at 45 was already hard. Moving it to 55 was hard. It's not anything on this side where we're like, oh yeah, it's like, we worry about it, but at the end of the day, there's sort of a black and white math that goes on, which is like, this is where it works and this is where it doesn't work. And, it's a fine line that you try to walk. Obviously, when we're talking about the $55 figures in there, Buzzsaw is disproportionately better than Steelheart. Yet they're both the same price. Well, it's like, because they're amortizing in within each other, so that as a whole, we're still getting to those prices. Or otherwise, all of a sudden you'd be like, well, Steelheart's 45, but Buzzsaw is 65. It's like, there's a lot of gains in there, and I think that would just be even more confusing. So I don't. It's a very tricky sort of like expectation, because I think there's this thing of like, oh, this costs pennies to make in China, and it's like, no, like China's about to be, are they the biggest economy in the world now? I can't remember if they're
really not
one
sure.
or two. They're one or two, and it's no different than this country. It's like nobody wants to work in a factory anymore. Like, nobody wants to do that. So all of those things are going away, and I think you'll continue to see, over the next 5 years, probably the majority of toy manufacturing not even happening in China anymore. I know that for us, we're already moving quite a lot to Vietnam and other countries, just simply because there's a price expectation from the customer that you have to meet that you can no longer achieve within China.
Yeah, it's tough. And it's one of those things too, where from the customer side of things, the other side of it, I mean, we're coming out of a pandemic right now where maybe collecting did get a little crazy while we were all sitting at home and wanting to buy a lot of things. But on the flip side, you do have to kind of look at the money, the income that we've got coming in. And it's not easy to always throw down that kind of money. So I definitely understand the challenges and how difficult it can be on your side to make something that, like you said, is a price point that the customer would expect or want to pay for an item.
I think the price point that the customer wants to pay is very different than what
they're
allowing.
It's like $5 like they were in the 80s, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. I try to be very conscientious about how often and when we go, and how often I'm coming to a certain customer and asking them,
sure,
hey, like if you collect turtles from us, like, we never have more than 2 pre-orders out at any given time, which is why ThunderCats 5 has not gone live, because 3 and 2 haven't hit people's hands yet. So I'm not going to launch 5 until those deliver, because that's a bit egregious. Even though there's people that might want them and they want to see them, like, you need to get these in your hands first. But it's like, how much am I asking that customer to spend, and how often am I asking them to spend it? So we're definitely trying to be like, look, it's every 4 to 5 months. I'm not trying to come to you every month and say, like, here's more turtles, here's more turtles, here's more turtles, or here's more ThunderCats. It's like, let's pace it, let's move it through, let's deliver product, and let's make the next one. That's why, Thunder Tank, sorry. That's why Thunder Tank did not launch.
What was that slip up?
Snake Mountain.
What was that slip up?
There's no slip up there. What are you talking about?
Okay. All right. Okay. We'll move along.
I'm sure there'll be naysayers about it, but we definitely spend a lot of time trying to make sure that we're not putting too much onto the same person over and over again, and that we're spreading it out and making it something that, while expensive, is still feasible to collect rather than just annihilating people.
Right. Right. Okay, very cool. I appreciate you breaking all that down. I really do. Like, and it's one of those things I see people concerned about and talking about all the time. I think it's good to put the information out there. So we'll move on from the pricing now, and we're going to talk about another thing that I see a lot of people talking about is the articulation on the figures. And we've talked
Yes.
about this before as well. But again, I think every time you got one of these new lines, you've got new eyes on it. And especially
Yes.
with the community that likes their superposable figures,
Yes.
buys their Marvel Legends, buys all that kind of stuff. There's always that question I see as to why these figures don't have the double jointed knees, don't have the double jointed elbows, more flexibility. And you've talked about this a little bit before, but is this something you can address?
Yeah, and I have a feeling I'll be addressing this, with every release we have for the next however long, which is fine. And I think it comes down to a personal choice on aesthetics. So if you do a double jointed elbow, which I don't have a toy in front of me to do, like when you do a double, I got to do some weird dupe to do. To get a double jointed elbow, you're going to have to cut a V here and a V here and remove all the material that exists inside this arm so that when it folds and folds again, it has space because there's no give, unlike human skin. If you have a single jointed elbow, I can get you to here, but I can't get you to here. So, we're going to lose 10 or 15 degrees, but I can still do, 80% of that level of articulation with single jointed. With double jointed though, you remove all of this out of here, and then you've got multiple cuts around the joint. Same thing with the knee. It's the hexagon in front of the knee, and then in the back of the knee, the calf swoops in, the whole back of the knee is carved out, and then it swoops back out for the hamstrings. In a single jointed figure, I can basically keep the entirety of this form. I can put that in there, and the amount of material I have to remove to get that joint to work is minimal because usually the ball exists on the outside of the arm. So in doing so, if I'm not doing a crazy pose, what you see in articulation, visible articulation, is minimal, the smallest amount. You'll see the line maybe for where, the forearm meets the elbow or something, but that's about it. And then when I've got it standing on the shelf, which is, to be very honest, for most of us, 90% of the time we have our toys, they're standing on the shelf, sort of, up and down. That cylinder, if you will, that goes from the shoulder to the wrist or from the waist to the ankle is solid the whole way down. It looks like the toy. And I'm going through there in my best, whether it's, however, in hiding the articulation into natural seams within the body. When you have a double jointed figure, in my opinion, what I see first is I see all the cuts for the articulation. I see all the missing plastic. And so what I see is articulation first, figure second. And I'm really trying to drive is I have a figure first with articulation second, not in a negative way. It still does 85, 90% of every pose you could ever want. Yes, it's not going to give you that last 10, 15% that looks really great, but the trade-off for me of what I lose in the visual aesthetic of making the beautiful toy, I think for the use case that myself and most collectors use their toys for is better suited for single jointed elbows versus double jointed elbows and knees. There are there are people that would make the opposite argument and say, to me, it's more important that it has articulation, additional articulation, whether they use it or not. And that's purely an aesthetic choice. But for me, where I'm really trying to replicate a character, I'm trying to hold as much material into the figure as possible to convey the shape and styling of that figure.
So
Was that long enough of a soliloquy?
no, it's good. It tells us exactly what you're thinking when you're designing these. I do want to ask with Silverhawk specifically, like I think about them in those flight poses. How's the neck gonna work? Do you think they'll be able to look up
Yes.
and do a flight
But
pose?
that's a perfect example. For us to make that flight pose, I have to remove a lot of extra material in the back of the neck so it can rock back even further. Now, the reason that I say yes, that's important is one, it makes sense for the pose. And two, for the most part, when you put that figure on your shelf standing, you can't see what's going on back here. Even if you look at
Okay.
it in 3/4 profile, you're not really going to see the back of the neck much. So I can remove that material to give it that added functionality where like if it was a knee, as soon as I get at 30 degrees and I'm looking at it, I see that leg come down and then do this and have that big giant V taken out of it. It drives me crazy. And then when I look at its legs, it looks like it's wearing a knee pad because there's a hexagon right in the center of his knee versus possibly, where I'm trying to do is like make it look like it's the kneecap coming down and coming around the calf. And it looks like it's a line delineating musculature slightly. I'm trying to hide it. Yeah, I think when people are like, you guys don't even know what, like there's modern articulation. It's like I'm keenly aware of all the other articulations that are out there. But I think if I'm trying to make that figure both aesthetically beautiful and articulate, this is the right example to get the most beautiful figure I can versus the most articulated figure.
And I also want to ask too on that, the capes. I've seen some people wondering how the wings basically are going to work on these, and I was curious as well. Now I think you're doing like an interchangeable piece, like an open wing and everything. Is that the plan with these?
Yeah, you'll take it off basically at the shoulder and then drop
Okay.
in new wings. So same thing, a lot of time around how are we going to handle the wings? Like obviously the vintage toys, they handled it with fabric. If we look at what was done with Sorceress, you have fabric wings, you have sort of slotted wings that slide on top of each other. And what is that look that you really want from Silverhawks? And I really think you want that even fan of the wings. And not like, oh, here's a layer, here's another layer, here's another layer, and how does it hide behind their back? But then it's got to join to multiple panels in the arm. It's got to join to the forearm. It's got to join to the bicep and everything. So what we ended up with was it's more of a fixed pose. You can still move, the wrists and a few other things, but it's like, here is the full flying pose, but where they look the best in a single flat plane. So you can swap out your arms as needed.
So are they attached to the arms or do they plug
They're
into?
attached to the
They're
arm.
attached to the arms. Okay. All right. That's cool. It's tricky. Like you brought up Sorceress specifically, and I feel like there's not been a great Sorceress still because it's just really hard to get that open wingspan on characters that have that.
Yeah. And especially with him, at least with Sorceress, her wings wrap around the back of the figure.
Yeah.
Where Silverhawks, it's supposed to go straight into the side of the torso.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's no place to hide that. There's no place to move it and slide it back. And we looked at probably 4 or 5 different options before we really settled on like, no, it's a static piece that attaches to the arms and gives you that look.
Very cool. All right, cool. I'm excited to mess around with that and actually play with that in person. But it's good to hear about the neck. That's one of the poses I wanted to make sure I could get was like a good flying pose with the head up and
The
everything.
head rocked full back, full 90 degrees.
Yeah, yeah. It just feels like it's a very iconic look for the characters. So it's something that you've got to be able to do there. All right. So let's see what we've covered. The paints, we've covered the articulation. I'm trying to like get through all the questions that I've seen here, but I think we've covered a lot of ground. Was there anything specifically that you wanted to bring up that we haven't brought up on these guys yet?
No, I mean, the response has been really positive. People seem to be really excited that we're making Silverhawks. Obviously, there's a lot of people that, they have their emotions tied into it, which is why we buy the toys and collect the toys that we do.
Yeah.
So the fact that they aren't vac metal, is problematic, but we knew that we were running into that problem. How we solve it, I think a lot of this will come back down to same thing. The more it's hard because they're not made yet, but like the more we can show people how the paint's going to look, the more we show them like that this is going to look, I think that that's really helpful. I think the hardest part really is that, like I said, most people's affinity for SilverHawks is less reliant on the cartoon and more reliant on the toy. And in going out there and saying, I'm making this set to family with your ThunderCats and continuing this animation line, you know, there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, but that's not the SilverHawks I love. The SilverHawks I love is the toy. So, but that said, I mean, for the most part, aside from, you know, people caring and wanting it to be the thing that they've longed for 35 years, you know, people have been pretty supportive of the line. So
that's good. So pre-orders, they're looking good so far?
So far, pre-orders, you know, are right on track.
Oh,
you know?
Good.
So they're doing, you know, to be quite honest, you know, we projected it being not as big as a ThunderCats line simply because, you know, ThunderCats is a much more well-known property than SilverHawks.
SilverHawks is great, but it's a little obscure, right? Yeah.
We're getting much more obscure.
Yeah.
But so far, you know, it's sort of heading into the same realm as ThunderCats, which was something we hoped would happen, but hadn't 100% planned for. We planned for it to be a little bit smaller, but that's a lot of it too, because that ThunderCat collector is the person that's coming along and saying, okay, yes, I want SilverHawks to go with my ThunderCats.
Well, then they want tiger sharks too. So
I trust me, I'm aware.
Just
Oh no. We were 30 minutes into the pre-order for SilverHawks before the questions about tiger sharks started.
Oh, I guarantee. Yep. Well, as soon as the ThunderCats line started, everybody was asking for SilverHawks. So that was the natural progression. I knew that was going to happen.
and I hope to one day satisfy all your collecting dreams and desires.
So if this is as successful as something like ThunderCats, do you think you would do vehicles like you did the Thunder Tank?
Oh, do what?
Like a vehicle? Like,
a vehicle?
I know that's going
to be, I'm not opposed to any of those things, but I think that those are very, one step at a time.
Exactly.
Working on Thunder Tank right now. Then we'll work on the next vehicle, and then we'll just sort of see how it goes. Those are rather preposterously large objects. And there will be a point where you're like, I love these, but I can't physically fit more than 3 of these in my home.
Yeah, I know. That's where I'm already at. Every time one of these new big things gets announced, where am I going to put that? I already got a Snake Mountain taking up an entire room, basically.
It's true. You could put your kids in it. Your baby could sleep in it.
Yeah.
It's, it's not to say that we aren't considering it. I think it's just when and how you get to that, we need to be very measured and very much like, let's make sure I keep saying ThunderCats, but Thunder Tank comes out properly and people are stoked on that. Then we can move on to the next.
Cool. Sounds good. So the current pre-order, how long does that go? And then when are you planning to ship these?
It goes, when does it stop? Does it stop?
Because it just launched. That's what I was just looking.
I want to say it closes middle of July. I'm not sure exactly. It's roughly a month after it started, and I think it started on the 13th. So I think it's the 12th. I think it ends the 12th of July.
Gotcha. Yeah. Usually you do the open pre-orders for a month, and then is it planning to ship? Was it 4th quarter this year, the first wave?
No, I think it technically speaking, it's on Q2.
Q2 next year. Okay.
Q2 next year, because, if you're talking about July, you basically have 5 months for the rest of the year. Then you have January, so that's 6 months. And then February is lost for Chinese New Year. March, people start coming back, but they're not really getting stuff out the factory till April. So the fact that you aren't delivered, it's sort of like if you either deliver in ship out of the factory in January, or you wait till April to ship out. Like you lose those 3 months.
Oh,
And
gotcha. Yeah.
with the nature of production, like I don't see it leaving before Chinese New Year. That said, I do think it will leave shortly after returning from Chinese New Year. But yeah, it's like February's lost. March, everything's starting again, so they can start working and completing things, but they're not going to be done with it till April. And that's when things will start shipping out. So I believe right now it's sort of like we say Q2 because it's like it should be leaving in April, because for it to leave before Chinese New Year, we'd need to be a little bit further along.
Cool. Well, you mentioned along the way, you might be able to show some updates and everything, especially as you're getting more physical samples and testing out that paint and everything. And maybe we can get back together at some point and you can actually hold them and show them to us. I think that'd be really cool. Yeah.
Unfortunately, like I said, school's out. I'm babysitting. Baby, you can't say you're babysitting your own kid. I'm at home.
You're parenting.
I am parenting, correct. So if I was at the office, I could hold up like, here's a resin cast and here's another resin cast, but I cannot do that at this moment.
Well, we'll just plan to touch base at some point. You just let me know when you've got stuff to show us.
And talk again next week.
Yeah, we'll just have to do this again, I guess.
Yeah, it's. But then again, I'd hold up the resin casts and they'd be from a month and a half ago and people would be like, well, wait, that's wrong.
No, yeah, we'll wait until you got something new to show us, some progress. I think that'd be real cool.
Hopefully we'll have the paint sorted sooner rather than later. Cause I think, like I said, once people see the finish that we're really going for, I think there'll be a lot more people like, oh, okay.
Well, I wonder if there's people waiting. Really I wonder if there's people holding off on even ordering them, like until they see something a little more concrete in what they're looking for. I mean, it's very possible.
It's very possible. I don't know. I mean, we typically, with our pre-order windows, we see a first 48 hours, and then it kind of levels off until the last 48 hours.
And then it spikes again. Yeah, that sounds about right. That's why you see with most people with like Kickstarters and stuff like that too. They all kind of do that same thing. Yeah. So you mentioned, let's just real quick off the top of your head, if you know all this stuff, you mentioned Turtles Wave 3 is starting to ship next week.
Yeah, it should be shipping. I believe it's shipping out of the warehouse next week. I only say that because I know the first of the containers arrived last week because I saw the pictures and it was okay. And so the rest of it arrived this week. So I believe, what they do then is a lot of it is staging how orders go out, zones in the country, how, like, when we really start shipping out pre-orders, it's usually like kind. So everybody that ordered a set of 4, because generally we'll get those sent from the factory pre-packed in sets of 4 versus if you didn't, then they come in solid cases like, oh, here's, one of this guy, one of that guy. And it's like, okay, first thing is solid packs of 4. And then you go by zones in the country because of how shipping works. And so like, okay, we need to label, pack, and palletize everything that's 4-pack at this weight for zone 1, pack and palletize everything at this weight for zone 2, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's like, okay, now it's everything that is 3 figures, because then the physical weight of the boxes and everything is the same. And so you're making like kind shipments so that when you're dealing with shipping agencies, they go, okay, the efficiency is size and weight and zone of the region of the country. And so it becomes this big dot matrix of, not dot matrix, that's a printer, but just matrix of like kinds, zones, places. And then that is the single most efficient way to get it out, as opposed to I ordered it first, I ordered it second. It's literally alphabetical by product quantity, type, and weight, then broken up by distance. And then
that's interesting. I guess I didn't realize that. I guess I just assumed it would have been by order.
No, if you did it by order, it would take twice as long
Huh.
because it's like, okay, I need to get 4 and this box weighs this much. Now I need to get 2, but this box is a different size, different
Okay.
weight.
I guess that
And
makes sense. Yeah.
And at the carrier level, well, this box is going to Florida, but this box is going to Nebraska. Well, those have to go different directions. If I can pre-pack a pallet where everything here is going to Florida, Alabama, and Georgia. Okay, that's a zone. Everything goes onto one plane that goes to one distribution center that then gets split up there. And if they're all the same weight, then you can calculate the weight of the pallet, and it's all about economies of time and space, and it's simply complicated.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
Do you have updated shipping on the other stuff that we're waiting on, like the next ThunderCats and everything?
ThunderCats 3 should be coming out of the factory in July. ThunderCats 2 should be coming out of the factory in August.
Oh, that's right. Those two were flipped. I remember you telling us that.
Well, ThunderCats 4 is slated for October out of the factory. So there's going to be a lot of ThunderCats in quick
succession. Yeah. Sounds like it.
No, I mean, it's just, 2 has been, 2 stuck behind a whole bunch of Jurassic Park figures. There's just no way around it.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, the fact, well, I think we talked about this before. We went to the factory that made the original ThunderCats, so there was consistency.
Yeah.
But it's a massive, massive factory, and our order is very, very tiny for that.
I got it. Okay. And that's because Mattel did the original line of ThunderCats, or the factory's the same. That's Jurassic Park figures. I was wondering, like, Jurassic Park figures. What?
So, like, you go there and it's just like, it's 20 assembly lines of Jurassic Park, and it's like, we'll fit you in.
Oh, wow.
Where
so is that just
primary factory that we go to, we are pretty much the majority of everything they make. Therefore, then it's on a much more regular timeline. So you see with turtles, like, they're pretty efficient. They come out as they come out.
Yeah.
Where if something happens to an order of 10 million T-Rexes and it bumps my order by a month, and T-Rex gets his priority. So, so we ended up we started 3 at that Mattel factory, and we ended up yanking it and taking it back to our factory. And so even with all that and restarting it, it's still ahead of wave 2.
Wow. See, this stuff is all just the kind of thing that you don't ever think about it. All the weird ins and outs of making some toys.
Yeah, and then you topple onto that. It's like, okay, great. It left the factory in July, but now we have this, pretty much before the global shipping pandemic, all this other stuff. It was like, it's a pretty consistent 28 days from port to port, and then, 3 to 7 days to get out of customs, and it's in our warehouse. So you could arguably say, hey, a month from ship time to when I have it. And now if you look up any of the myriad of articles or about shipping, it's like everything's 60, 75 days now. So I don't know when it's going to land. We've had shipments lately that have shown up in 40 days. I've had shipments that have shown up in 80 days. And there's no rhyme or reason. Shipping costs right now are about 4 times what they were a year ago. We book freight and then get bumped. It's because somebody's willing to pay more. Freight right now is just the wild, wild west,
man.
And they're going to make as much money as they can while they can. But, and then right now, supposedly there's going to be a dock workers strike in LA, and that'll mess it up even more.
Oh man. Yeah.
So, those are the things that just get frustrating, where it's like the product is done, but I can't give it to you yet.
Yeah.
So I can't promise the day it's going to be in your mailbox, but I know it's done. And I think for a lot of people, as long as I can be like, here's the box, here's the figure, like, it's finished. Like, okay, we know it's coming. We know it's coming.
Yeah. Right.
Because wave 2 has taken far too long. But
it's coming.
But it's coming. And
It's
then
coming.
wave 3, was a little long because we switched factories, but wave 4 is now, right behind it.
Right
and it's
behind
on a
it.
normal schedule.
So once we once we get ourselves caught up, it'll just be on the same consistency as Turtles and everything else.
Exactly, where it's just
you got a rhythm now.
Here it comes. But there's certain things certain lines that happen where they're just like, it seems like they're cursed. So
right. Well,
ThunderCats wave 2 and NJPW 2.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's right. NJPW 2.
That one, I mean, we're almost there, so close. But oh my God, please leave the factory.
Well, you mentioned earlier that you don't like to reveal too many things at once while there's too many open pre-orders. So with SilverHawks open pre-order right now for wave 1, probably shipping in Q2, do you guys have a roadmap of when we will see new things for SilverHawks yet, when we can expect it?
Yeah, I would, SilverHawks Q2 will be toward the end of this year, generally speaking, because like I said, it takes that, 8, 10, it's supposed to take 8 months, takes 10, 11 months sometimes to get these things out. It's like, I don't like having more than 2 pre-orders open. So
right.
I can tell you that SilverHawks Wave 3 will not launch until SilverHawks Wave 1 arrives.
So how far ahead have you already planned? Can you tell me how many waves?
Just between us, I won't tell anybody. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, just between us, Brian. I won't tell anybody.
No, on paper, it's scripted all over the place. But sure. I mean, we're actively in sculpting wave 2 right now. We know what wave 3 is. So cool. I'm very confident that we're going to get through quite a bit of this. And I'm hoping that it can be like where we're headed with ThunderCats, which is where we went with Masters, where we can go really deep and that the fan base really wants all the more obscure and interesting characters that they haven't had before.
That's awesome. That's awesome to hear. That's awesome. I hope we get there.
Me too.
Yeah, that's cool. Awesome. Well, I think you've basically covered everything that I had to ask you tonight, Brian. This has been a great conversation, and I really appreciate you always sitting down and getting detailed with us on this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say there's not a lot of secrets. Obviously, there's things I can't talk about.
Right.
But there's not, it's not a magical mystery thing. It's like most of the stuff is fairly mechanical. If there's a delay, there's a mechanical reason for it. A tool went wrong, an approval went long, like whatever. Like, we're working through it. And so if you want to know, I'll tell you the answer. The difference is sometimes that answer is 10 minutes long.
That's okay. That's okay with me. I just appreciate it. It's a learning experience for me. I've always talked about that. Like, part of the reason I do what I do is because I find the industry fascinating and I like learning this stuff. So you are much appreciated, my friend.
One of these days, you'll just have to come to China with us and go to the factory.
Well, that would be cool.
Yeah. I don't know if I can afford the ticket.
Okay, I'll buy my own ticket, I guess.
Wow. Just saying. Yeah, it's the same thing. Every time we go over there, we're like, oh, we should be filming this. And I'm like,
oh, that's what I do.
Yeah, see, I know.
There you go.
No, actually, that's not true. That's what your wife does.
Oh, that's true. Oh, okay. I guess you better take Christina with you to.
Exactly. We didn't need Dan.
I'll just narrate the footage that she brings home. That's what
And the best part is she will have no interest in being there.
No. I can't believe I got stuck following Brian around now. It's bad enough I have to follow my husband.
Yeah, exactly.
I love you, Christina. You're awesome.
Yes, exactly.
All right, Brian. Well, I really appreciate it again, man. Thank you so much for sharing all this information on SilverHawks. And we will definitely plan to meet up and talk about this more as we go. And I'm sure we'll be meeting up to talk about other projects from Super7 as well.
There's some secrets coming. We got it. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, awesome. I'll be on it. Very cool. Well, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time.